the world is either flooding or on fire.
Oh my gosh. Do you think that's because of climate change?
Oh, absolutely, I do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question.
There's no other explanation, right?
No.
No
Absolutely.
question. And I know this isn't your expertise. Your expertise is the science and psychology of smell.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to climate change, is there a reason why we use the term climate change instead of global warming?
So the terms are, in my opinion, kind of politically loaded. And global warming was a term that was initially used by the scientists who first were observing that the fact that the world was actually warming. But then it kind of got a little bit twisted around, I think, politically. So talking about climate change is a little bit more neutral in the sense that there are some places that could be getting colder and other places that are getting hotter. And, there's floods and there's fires. So basically, the climate is changing is a little bit more of a neutral term rather than global warming per se, even though, if you were to take the thermometer of the earth and sort of assess it on average, there is an average temperature increase that everybody is I hope, worried about.
And
That's
is climate change happening directly because of carbon emissions?
So I am not an expert who can wade into that. And I think that there are multiple reasons for climate change happening that have to do, put it this way. I believe that humans are responsible for this current acceleration in the way that the world is changing. There are also natural phenomena that are probably coexisting at this particular time that are not helping matters from the point of view of the safety of the planet and our health within it. But I can't speak to the specifics of, carbon emissions, et cetera. I know that plays a role, but I really don't know.
So last question about it, because this is something I've never talked about to my audience, and I think it's kind of relevant. So what can you and I do to help protect the earth and slow down climate change?
So actually, from the point of view of smell being my topic, I think that actually smells are chemicals, and being able to assess how the world around you, how it smells and how that might be changing is, I think, a really useful barometer for determining the degree to which the climate around you may be becoming less healthy, maybe being altered in various ways. For example, there are tribes in the Amazon who have noticed over the past 30 years as a function of pollution, as a function of water being polluted with, upstream by various, manufacturing and industry, that their fish are changing, that the water is actually smelling different than it used to. And, so these people say, well, our water smells different. Our water now smells bad. It used to smell so great, and now it smells bad, according to these people. But the government doesn't want to do anything about it because, there's no actual marker. You're saying that the water smells different, the water smells bad, but that's not proof, so to speak, that there's, damage done to the ecosystem. But actually, from my perspective, that is a very good signal. And so paying attention to, let's say the way the flowers in your garden smell today, and do they smell the same in 5 years? And how are they smelling different? Or are they growing differently too? Does that mean actually that the environment that they're in, which is also the environment you're in, is changing? And could that be changing to become less safe, less positive from the point of view of, let's say, just the air that we breathe?
Right.
So I think paying attention to how the world around you smells, like I can smell outside today because of the smoke. Like it smells, I can almost taste it. Like I can smell this smoky, weird quality in the air. And, I know that what's going on is causing it. And if I didn't know, I might go, oh, it just kind of smells weird and moving right along. But I think that we actually have to trust our noses more than we do, because we tend to discount them. So if we say, oh, it smells funny outside, we're not going to say that it has very much meaning unless we know that there's a meaning associated to it.
Right.
But I think we should trust our noses to tell us that there may be something bad going on. And paying attention to that is something that we can then become in control of. And then if we're in control of it and we're acknowledging it, then we can say, what can we do to try to mitigate this, to try to stop it, slow it down, whatever the case might be.
Interesting. I love that take. And I think that's a great segue into the first question I'm going to ask you. And I already recorded an intro for you and everything, so the listeners already heard the intro. When it comes to this podcast, it's called the Live Better Now podcast. We talk all things personal growth, self-development, mental health, mindset. I wanted to sort of bridge a gap between our senses and mental health, and how if we're more aware of our senses, it brings more mindfulness to our lives.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, smell, and that's exactly why I wanted to have you on the podcast today as a doctor specialized in the psychology of smell and how it affects our emotions and how it affects a lot of other areas of our life. Tell us more about what you've learned over the last 30 years researching this, 30 some odd years, 40 some odd years, whatever it is, and
No.
tell us how the listener can apply that to the life so they can live a mentally healthier life.
So the sense of smell is directly connected to our mental health because the area of the brain that is actually processing our conscious perception of smell, so that when you recognize the smell of, let's say, baking bread, where that is happening in your brain is actually the exact same part of the brain where emotion is being processed, where associations are being processed, and various forms of learning and memory. It's called the amygdala hippocampal complex. So we have an area of the brain that's doing two functions completely, both independently and simultaneously when smell is involved. And that's why our first experience of a scent is fundamentally emotionally loaded. And so one thing to think about is that our experiences with smell are directly involved with our emotional state. And we can actually use that to our advantage. If there are smells that we like, we can make sure to expose ourselves to them when we want to get into a particular mood. And this is not aromatherapy. I mean, people should have their own kind of personal apothecary so that you have your favorite fragrances, your favorite scents outdoors, or whatever the case might be, that then you go to for particular mood shifts. And you may have a variety of different smells that have to do with different particular moods. And on the flip side of that, there are smells which for certain people can be very negative, can be associated to extremely traumatic events, like PTSD, for example, is often triggered by a scent that was connected to that original event. And understanding that link, understanding how to, let's say, for example, take back the scent by working with it to decouple it from the traumatic experience, I think is definitely something that can be done. You can even use awareness of potentially what scents you might encounter. So rescue workers, military personnel, and so forth, who would be going into a combat situation, there may be particular odors that are going to be involved in a situation that could become linked to trauma, that if you work with ahead of time, you can desensitize yourself so that they don't become trauma triggers in the future. And overall, literally, as you just said, taking time to stop to smell the roses or coffee is something that we can do just to become more aware of the moment and to take more appreciation in the moment.
Yeah, stop and smell the roses, which means, hey, there are beautiful roses right next to you. Instead of continuing to go, forward, just stop for a second, smell the beautiful roses because they're right in front of your face. Take a step back, take a deep breath, relax. Life is short. You're not going to get there any faster than you would if you didn't smell the roses. So you might as well just stop and smell the roses. And, I see so many people. I live down in South Florida in Jupiter, and, there's quite a bit of people here. A lot of people migrated here from the Northeast after COVID, and there's so much traffic, and people are just honking at each other, and we're not going anywhere, guys. There's nowhere for me to go. There's 25 cars in front of me. You can stop honking behind me because I waited half a second to go when the car in front of me started moving forward. Why don't they stop and smell the roses? Now, when I try to think about how I myself can be more mindful, or I can apply the knowledge that I'm learning today with you on the psychology of smell, I'm like, okay, if I'm feeling bad, how do I feel good by using a smell that makes me feel good? And I don't really know what smell that is because I don't think I'm super aware of my smell sense as much as my feel, sight, hear senses, right? So how can we consciously utilize our smell sense more? And question, is it the type of thing where it's like, if you don't use it, you lose it? Like, if we're not constantly being aware of our smell sense, is it possible that we could lose the sense of smell we have?
So starting with your second question first, because that's a great way to sort of answer both. absolutely the sense of smell is a use it or lose it sense. Now, that doesn't mean that if we're like not paying attention to smells that we're suddenly going to become anosmic, which means losing the ability to smell. But when we pay attention to smells, we actually can smell more. More of our brain is recruited in the act of smelling. We can smell at lower threshold. That is to say, our sensitivity is higher and our perception of the smell world is just magnified. But then going to your first point, and I'm completely the sort of the proselytizer of paying attention to smells and your sense of smell. And so basically my mandate, my mission, my sort of, word on the street is you should be smelling and paying attention to that experience all the time. So literally it's just paying attention. So when the bread comes out of the oven, just pay attention to the fact that actually there's a smell going on here. It smells great. Or so all kinds of foods that we're eating. Or I walk outside and any day, whether the season's changing or not, or whatever the case is, inhale. What is that like? And kind of mark that in your mind. Not every single second, taking active sniffs and going, this is what's going on, that's what's going on. But when you sort of start a new moment or when something in your environment is changing, inhale and just pay attention to that and say, okay, what is that? Where is that coming from? How does that make me feel? It's literally seconds at most. And it will just enrich your experience, both of the world around you, your emotional state, and your ability to smell. So you mentioned COVID a second ago. So probably the best treatment for people that have lost their sense of smell from COVID, which is actually still about 30 million people worldwide haven't gotten it back. And for many people, it was a brief but really profound symptom. The way people with long COVID with the smell loss can actually help regain their sense of smell is something called smell training. It's literally exercising your nose by deliberately sniffing a set of 4 distinctive scents several times a day for several months. It's kind of a pain in the ass. People find it frustrating and, I have to sit down and sniff again. But again, it's literally just seconds or like in a total a couple of minutes, a few times a day. If that doesn't work, switch to another set of scents. And really what you're doing is just deliberately sniffing and thinking. So even if you're not getting the scent back, let's say you have the smell of coffee as one of them. And you know that like you really like the smell of coffee and coffee is like you're kind of like makes you feel kind of alive and happy first thing in the morning. So you sniff your coffee beans, you say, I'm not getting anything, but I'm thinking about coffee. I'm thinking about that feeling association. And you're kind of making that connection in your brain. And even if your senses aren't picking it up, it's still kind of activating an underlying substructure for that. And over time, that seems to be actually a pretty effective way for people to regain their sense of smell. So we should be doing that throughout our life because like our other senses, as we get older, our sense of smell stops being quite as good as it was before, but it's very different for everybody. But we should all be kind of smell training every day, like get up, work out, sniff, move on.
Is there a direct correlation between someone's ability to smell and their IQ, or their ability to smell and their happiness level, or their ability to smell and their fitness quality of life level? And if there is there a test or an exam that someone can take to find out their ability to sniff?
So those are all really great questions. And the best way to answer that is kind of in the negative. So people who lose their sense of smell, there is a direct correlation between a decline in sense of smell and decreasing cognitive function, decreased quality of life.
Makes sense.
Decreased in all kinds of things. But to the extent that you have like a hyperacute sense of smell and what your IQ is, that has not been looked at. And I wouldn't think that there was really going to be a direct correlation there. When you're stimulating the part of the brain that's involved with smell, you are actually innervating and stimulating other parts. So it's basically like the exercise is really keeping the motor turning. So when you lose input from that sense, you are kind of depressing, so to speak, the whole system. And specifically with mental health and emotional state, because smell is so connected to that, it's even more impactful there. So you may have already heard recently a lot of talk about hearing loss and cognitive function. So that's very well established. And smell and the input from is another piece of that same puzzle for neuroplasticity, but it has the extra link because unlike hearing isn't so directly involved in our emotional state the way smell is because of where the brain is being activated when we smell.
Interesting. Because I only think that it makes sense that it's important to have your senses working to have a high and long quality of life. You cannot have a high quality of life if your eyesight is bad. You cannot have a high quality of life if, you have nerve damage and you can't feel things. Obviously, if, you're near a hot stove and you don't have any feeling in your arm and your arm's close to the stove, you're going to catch on fire without realizing it, right? So it's important to have these senses working and optimizing them. And it's really up to us to be conscious of our senses and be aware of how we can consciously use our senses. And smell is one that, is kind of, I don't want to say the odd man out, but it's like, you don't really think that it's important to have a good sense of smell, because smell is like, it just hits you, right? Like you smell dog poop and, you look at the bottom of your shoes, you have poop on the bottom of your shoes. Like you drive past Chipotle and you smell Chipotle, or you drive past a pizza place and you smell the pizza. But actually going out of your way to be intentional about trying to smell your surroundings, I would assume would be a good exercise and practice to increase your ability to sniff.
Yes, and I really want to go back to that quality of life point. And it's actually not just any old sense. There was a study done in the UK a number of years ago where people who were blinded after a traumatic accident and people who'd lost their sense of smell after a traumatic accident were compared in terms of how they were coping, both initially and 1 year later. So initially, the people who've been blinded were much more traumatized. The world was like, everything was turned upside down for them. People who had just lost their sense of smell was like, oh yeah, whatever, I'll be fine. A year later, the people who were blinded were coping, they were adjusting, their life had gotten on, they were generally faring fairly well. The people who had lost their sense of smell, their world was completely deteriorating. Everything about their life was falling apart. Overall, this is averages. So actually, and this is really because of the way our emotional life, our social life is actually very much connected to our sense of smell. Our sexual and intimate relationships are very much connected to our sense of smell.
Right.
Our sense of ourself. And actually, so many things people think about, oh, I need to be able to smell the fire, or, it would be nice to be able to smell chocolate. But actually, it is involved in nearly every aspect of our lives. And people don't realize it until they lose it. And then it's like they're stumbling around sort of almost like in a padded box. It's like I can't get out there and really feel the world. And it touches so many things. And that's why quality of life is really so negatively impacted, unlike it is losing another sense, which is really bad,
Right.
Absolutely. But it affects people in a different way.
Interesting. Now, because we now have learned that it impacts our quality of life a lot, more so than even losing our vision, what should we do to make sure that we are taking care of our nose? I assume it's not good to be sniffing drugs like cocaine, and that I'm sure impacts, seriously though, and I'm sure that impacts our ability to smell in a negative way. And I know you specialize more so in the psychology and the emotional side, emotions, on how sniff is related and smell is related to emotions and psychology. But let's talk about the physical piece of the nose, right? The nose protects us from something, I would assume. There's a reason why we have it. But what can we do to make sure that we're keeping our nose as healthy as possible?
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually know a fair bit about the physiology of olfaction also. So one thing about the sense of smell, which is very fortunate, is that it is continuously regenerating. So the sensory neurons that are detecting the chemicals in the world around us that are smells are actually directly exposed to the environment. And as a function of being directly exposed to the environment, they're being assaulted, over the course of normal life by tons of things. And if we didn't have this regeneration capability, we'd all have no sense of smell by the time we were like 5 years old. But actually, approximately every month, there's a complete turnover of the olfactory sensory neurons. So we're getting, an enriched, fully functional sense of smell. Now, what tends to happen with aging is that turnover starts faltering. So you get more sensory neurons die off and they don't get replaced to the same extent. So you have fewer and fewer ones that are functioning properly. So that's typically what happens in normal aging. But the environment, like pollution, direct toxins to the olfactory sensory neurons, impacts them. A variety of different sorts of things. So like if people work, with a lot of chemicals, depending upon what they do, that direct exposure.
Like a pool cleaner or a carpet cleaner or a pest control guy or...
Right. So it's very important to be wearing protective gear if you're directly exposed to lots of chemicals. So even smoking cigarettes, smoking cigarettes, actually, that inhalation of smoke is directly killing off those sensory neurons. And what tends to happen, people who were smokers and then they quit, And a month later, they go, oh, food tastes so much better. But it's actually their sense of smell that's come back and giving them that enriched sense of flavor. So you also, interestingly enough, what is something good from the point of view of helping to prevent viruses from getting into our nose, because actually COVID infects us through the nose. So it's literally that as a function of breathing in the virus particles that we get sick with it. And people who do things like nasal lavage, there's some evidence that actually helps clear not just COVID viruses, but other upper respiratory tract infections. So less.
Is that the little teapot thing that you put in your nose and I love that thing. Yeah, I use that. I use that when I get stuffy nose, which isn't often, but that's great.
Yeah. So doing that is actually a good thing to do. And basically, being aware of the environment. So if you're aware that you're in, it's really smoky outside, or it's really polluted where I am, or whatever the case might be, better stay indoors for your health, not just your lungs, but also your sense of smell. But the good news is that even if you do damage it from exposure, whatever the case might be, as long as you're healthy and relative, it's very different for everyone. So even older people can have benefit of regeneration, but maybe not quite to the same impact as younger people. But if you're young and healthy, you don't have to worry. Your sense of smell will regenerate if you get out of that toxic environment. But it's important to be aware of the fact that you are in a toxic environment to know that maybe something is going on.
Right. Interesting. Are there any questions you have for me when it comes to smell or anything to evaluate my awareness around my ability to smell and sniff?
Well, I guess I'm just fundamentally interested in you and what you do. I know that you sort of, you're a life coach and you work with various people. And I'm wondering actually how you're going to help shape what we've talked about today to help clients you might work with. For me, that's
vacation. I know exactly how I'm going to do that. And I want to think about it more before I give you a concrete answer, but just shooting from the hip here. So I believe that mindfulness is a big piece of happiness. And when I say piece, I mean like a puzzle piece, not like piece like this, right? So I think being more aware of our smell and on a macro level, just our senses allows us to take deeper breaths. Like even when I say that, I'm just like my senses, I'm just like kind of just like feel lighter and feel more grounded. As an entrepreneur, I'm a full-time real estate agent. I'm a full-time life coach too. I'm publishing 2 podcasts a week. This is episode 200 and probably 25 by the time this goes out. And I'm training for my 4th Ironman. I have a girlfriend that I spend time with, and I do a lot. We all do a lot, right? We're all really busy. And it's important for me to always connect back to being right here, right now with what I got from where I'm at. And not worrying about tomorrow, not worrying about where the stock market is, not worrying about how much money I'm making this week, and focusing on like 2:20 p.m. It's June 7th, 2:20 p.m. Like I'm happy. I have everything I need. I'm having a great conversation with someone who's extremely intelligent. Like I'm so lucky and blessed to have a conversation with you, right? Like I'm learning something by these 25 minutes of having this conversation. So I think applying it to my life and sharing this application to my clients' lives, I don't know exactly what the specific exercise is going to be, but I think a lot of the things that we do revolve around food in a good way and bad way. So when I eat, I try to eat very slow. I try to put the fork down between bites. I try to smile when I'm done swallowing. I try to chew 12 times before I swallow, right? And that kind of brings the mindfulness piece into eating. When I shower, I try to like watch the water fall off my elbow, and I try to like really feel the water and feel the temperature. And like that helps me connect back to like right here, right now with what I got from where I'm at. So I think having the conversation with you is kind of just, I guess, reminding me that I have this other sense of smell, and I can try to find ways throughout my life, like hacks, if you will, that I already do every single day. For example, maybe it's, when I'm pulling out of my garage and I got the windows down and I got the sunroof open and I just try to smell the day, because I'm sure days smell different. And in Florida, it's a very wonky environment. It's very humid. There's quite a bit of fires too every once in a while. I live very close to the beach, so sometimes you can really smell the salt water coming off the coast. So I'm going to try to be more aware of that. And I'm going to find a moment in my life that I do every single day, like pulling out of the garage, to make sure I connect back to my sense of smell.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think the idea of threading the sense that you're experiencing with that moment is exactly like the way to bring that together.
Good. Anything else before we wrap up today?
Well, you might be able to tell that I could talk for literally hours and hours and hours about this. So, I mean, if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to keep on going, or we could talk again another time about some other aspect of this, because really I cover, a lot about, not just the psychology, but also the physiology, the neuroscience, the loss of smell, the health component of it more directly. So, if you wanted to bring up something again, I'd be happy to jump on.
I'm very interested in neuroplasticity and neuroscience. And my definition of neuroscience and neuroplasticity, even though I know there is an actual like Webster's dictionary of neuroplasticity, is the fact that we now have learned in the last 10 to 15 years, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we can change our DNA, we can alter our brain chemistry, we can get smarter and increase our IQ, and we can rebuild or regenerate new, healthier cells in our body to, like, I guess, live healthier and have healthier cells. And that's like, and it's not through like red light therapy or 20-minute sauna every single day or 5-minute cold plunges. No, it's from consciously utilizing our mind, utilizing our thoughts, right? And connecting our thoughts with emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And when we feel emotions like appreciation, gratitude, and love, our body physiologically works more efficiently when we're feeling these things, like our heart, our brain, and our lungs, which allows our body to just work and in a better way. It's kind of like how I see neuroplasticity and things like that. Is that true? Am I off base?
Well, I think you're talking about a lot of different components of modern medical science at the moment. So, I mean, with respect to stem cell treatments and altering DNA and the different sorts of, a new vaccine for cancer, for example, and all the incredible innovations that are happening at a more basic physiological level from a medicine perspective. And then there's the aspect that I think, which to me is what neuroplasticity is about. It is about the fact that the input into our brain, which we can control, is going to alter how our brain works. And fundamentally, how our brain works affects everything downstream, so everything in our body. So we can, by smelling more intentionally, more deeply, better, change our brain chemistry, change our emotional state, which is then going to have impact on our heart rate, impact on neurohormonal modulation of a whole variety of different processes within us, which can then, let's say, make us healthier, make us stronger, make us smarter, and so forth. So not in any kind of giant sort of sense, but little incremental tweaks that we can do by harnessing our awareness of our senses, and specifically from my perspective, the sense of smell, we can affect these downstream changes, which have very positive benefits to them. And the more that we are doing this and the more that we're harnessing this, the better overall our life will be. Now, it's an extreme position of privilege to be able to do this, but if you have that privilege, then do it.
And like, for example, learning a new language.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that neuroplasticity at work?
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Doing things like brushing our teeth with our opposite hand. Is that neuroplasticity at work?
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, yes and no. I mean, it's definitely forcing you to sort of sort of organize how you do something. It is neuroplasticity, I would say, for sure, but not quite at the same level as, let's say, learning a new language. So there's different levels of it. But all these things that are challenges to the rote and the routine, those affect neuroplasticity. So that's like using your opposite hand. But when you challenge your brain in a much more complex way, like learning another language, that's having a much more global and widespread impact.
Right. Is that kind of like the pinnacle of neuroplasticity exercises, learning a new language?
I would have to think about that. I'm not sure that it's the pinnacle. It definitely is up there. I mean, for example, learning a musical instrument,
Uh,
learning music. So there's
Great.
all kinds of other things that are complex, learning a totally new subject. So like saying, I'm going to take an advanced course in mathematics and I know like nothing about it. So anything that's going to really challenge what you already know, what's going to sort of, expand your mind, as it were, that's maybe not from a drug perspective. However, proponents of hallucinogenics and so forth,
Uh-huh.
one of the things that they feel is positive about it is how it actually alters neural circuitry, how it shifts people's perspective on things, and
In a
especially,
good way.
yeah, in a good way. So people who are, suffering with various problems, that can actually be a benefit. So, again, in a very controlled way and so forth. But
Hmm.
anything that's going to have an impact on the way our brain functions, it's going to challenge how our brain functions, it's going to be good. But from my perspective, the safer things to do are things that we have control over, things that we're bringing in from the outside, like music, like language, like mathematics, like smell.
You've inspired me to learn something new, because I always do my Duolingo, my Spanish on my phone, and I'm always trying to learn about a new topic, whether it's deeper into sales, deeper into marketing, and I think I want to pick up a musical instrument. So stay tuned to see which musical instrument I pick up. Now, I want to play a game with you as we finish up. I'm going to say a word. It's like a health hack. It's going to be some food. It's going to be some like biohacking things. And I just want to get a short like answer on good, bad, overrated, underrated, like don't believe it works, XYZ. Okay.
Well, that's
First one, yoga,
good.
cold plunge,
I don't know.
intermittent fasting.
Probably good.
Why probably?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different variations on intermittent fasting. So people have like, oh, well, I mean, I ate between hours X and Y, or I fasted for, a whole day. So the degree of intermittent fasting, and I think it actually interacts a lot with individual differences in the circadian processing of their own metabolism. So kind
Mm,
of intermittent fasting, generally speaking, is good, but you have to kind of calibrate it properly for the individual to make it really
that
be.
context was great. I appreciate that. Red light therapy.
I don't know what that is.
Okay. EMF radiation from like 5G and Wi-Fi routers and things.
I don't really know, but I'm not worried about it.
Okay. Blue light exposure from our cell phones, our TV against our vision.
So that's bad from a circadian perspective. It alters
Yeah.
the sleep-wake cycle.
And when you say circadian perspective, if we're on our phone up until we go to sleep, we're not going to be able to sleep as well.
Well, yeah. So if we're overstimulated, you want to have, I mean, in addition to smell, I actually do a lot of work on sleep and circadian rhythms also. And you want to, from a maximum health perspective, get a consistent amount of sleep and sleep within your optimal range of circadian cycle. So it's different for different people. Some people are night owls, some people are really larks, like they get up super early. Most of us are kind of in the middle, but it's figuring out where you function best. And if you can, living within that zone, but also being consistent. So going to
Mhm.
bed at the same time, waking up at the same time as much as possible, and getting, 6 hours of sleep or more. That's
Got it.
definitely important.
Coffee.
Depends on the person also.
I was going to say psilocybin, but I think you already answered that.
But
What,
again, depends on the person and depends on the
right.
the controlled aspect of it.
What about alcohol?
I would say probably overall not so great, but again, in dose dependence. So from the point of view of relaxation, celebration, and so forth, it's certainly a good thing. Overconsumption, not a good thing.
Right. All right. I got four more. Bee sting therapy.
So I read about that in a book, but I mean, it was a novel. But I have no idea to the extent that there's what the validity is for that.
Oh my gosh. Crazy, right? We've heard some crazy things here in 2023, but bee sting therapy sounds crazy to me. Keto diet.
Again, very specific to the particular individual. And if you have diabetes, if you have epilepsy, there's even potential for migraine. I mean, under certain conditions, keto diet can be helpful for recalibrating that individual to be healthier. Should the average person be on a keto diet? No, we need fat. We need carbohydrates. we need all the macronutrients. So focusing only on a few at the, and taking others out is actually not healthy. So carbohydrates are good, but certain people have a really hard time metabolizing them. Certain people have disorders as a function of them. Those people, keto is good, but not for everybody.
Okay. And last two, Adderall?
No, bad.
Why so?
Because, there's an ethical aspect to it. I think that it's, from the point of view of college students, I teach college students, it's not fair if Johnny is doing Adderall and does better than Susan because of that. So there's that. But also, these kind of overdosing certain aspects of brain chemistry can actually backfire in the long run. So you can actually do some damage in the long run if you overexpose your brain to specific compounds, because it's the same thing with other kinds of drugs that we take that are not, they're in our body naturally. And if we overdose on them so that our bodies get extra, what happens over time is actually we sort of resynchronize so that it's not actually so effective. So then we need more and more and more. And that over time can actually produce damage. So the long-term consequences of Adderall, like I'd like to know when these people are 80, how their brain is functioning. And my guess is actually that it would not be nearly as good as someone who never did Adderall. I know up to that same level.
And last one, marijuana.
Again, very much individual, small dose, occasional, totally fine, overdose. And today, when everything is manufactured and you can get like such high levels of THC and different interactions with CBD, and there's so many different aspects that are going on that actually the chemical effect, I think, can be a lot more serious than in the past when you were just buying weed from your neighbor. So it's like, even though you would think at one level, better living through chemistry, it's more organized now, but at the same time, there's still a lot that's not known. And a lot of what's coming out from the most recent marijuana research is that it's not so great. So again, in moderation, occasionally, I'm totally good with it, but it's something that should not be overconsumed.
Got it. Rachel, Dr. Herz, thank you so much for your time today, especially taking out of your busy schedule to hop on the podcast. It was a pleasure, and thank you so much again.
Thank you, Zach. I loved it. And can you send me a link when you post this live, and I will put
Absolutely.
it on?